Oh, that's so abrupt. I know we need to do something about that.
Just come in here jamming.
And
Well, good morning.
It's like, oh, them again. All right.
Well, good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. I'll get us back on track. It's all right.
Yep, right.
So this series is for anyone.
Professionalism. We'll
This
rise
series,
above it.
we'll get there eventually. This series is for anyone who manages projects or project teams for a living. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. So in each episode, we talk about some of the common pitfalls. We share personal stories and experiences and explore strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
It's a good thing I'm introing this.
Yes.
So in this episode, this one today,
yes,
we're going to talk about integrating risk management into strategic planning. This is a very important one. And in many ways, kind of part two to the last week's episode on estimating and planning. It can be an incredibly important skill to develop to proactively identify, assess, and mitigate risks in your projects.
And this really should be part of your project methodology. This isn't just like a one-time thing that you do up front at the beginning of a project. This should be part of your weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, however frequent your planning activities. I'd actually argue that you should be thinking about this. This is where I say that like have it as part of your methodology. I'd argue that it needs to be part of your daily assessment as you're getting more information, as tasks are being completed, that you learn more about your project, that you're analyzing constantly potential risks and developing mitigation strategies.
Yes, and it will save your butt over and over and over and over and over.
And I'm sure you've never been through this scenario, Sharon. It's so rare that it happens here, but it should be a good conversation.
No, everything always goes exactly the way that I plan with literally no deviation. So I don't even understand why we need to have this conversation.
It's where you leave gaps in the planning. That's where problems arise, Sharon. So if you plan correctly, you just plan to not have problems.
Obviously.
That's right. Right. As with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode. Share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed.
All right, let's get started with some definitions.
Yeah, risk management. I mean, it's one of those things. It's about identifying, analyzing, mitigating potential risks. You know, what does that actually mean? Anything that could throw off your project objectives. I mean, a great example of this is I remember having a conversation, sitting down with some other managers, and we had several key people that we were aware were actively looking to move up in the company elsewhere. So we were under constant threat of losing key people. And so that was an important part of, we talked about each of the individuals. And I was always the type of manager, I don't want to stand in somebody's way if they're moving up in their career, there's opportunities elsewhere, more money, more responsibility, whatever that is. I don't want to get in the way of people. I want to support them. If it's a good hire for the companies, especially, I want to keep them in the company, even though I'm losing them on my team. And so, but you need to mitigate that. If we lost this person, what does that mean? What are we going to do? And then plan for that.
Yeah, this is, we are so good at this naturally as humans. Like, this is the one time, people are like, be positive, focus on what can go right. And that's just what people say like day to day in life, right? But like, this is the time where we get to be 100% thoroughly human, and we get to think about what could go wrong? What are we going to get in trouble for? What should we not do? What are the things that are potentially going to completely eat our lunch, right? This is when we get to really kind of awfulize things and make a list of those things so that we can make sure that if they do happen or when they happen, we're prepared for that.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, I mean, if you think about strategic planning, this is about, we've got our project goals, the milestones, all of the priorities. We've got our cadence of meetings where we're reviewing the task status, the updates of all those things. going in and integrating the risk management component ensures that if there are obstacles, if things happen along the way, you've anticipated those, you've addressed those things, and you're prepared for it. It's actually one of the most fulfilling aspects, in my experience as a project manager, is when you anticipated a potential problem and it happens, you're like, no problem. We've got it, plan B is in place. We've got C, D, and E ready to go. We're rolling with plan B here. We knew this might happen. It's unfortunate. Here we are. Let's go.
I think any project manager who thinks that any project will not have problems has not been doing it very long, or maybe lives in some alternate reality that maybe they don't talk about. But no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's really satisfying, especially the more experience you build. And once again, this is very innately human to go back and say, no, I've been down this path. Let me show you the rocks I tripped on. And so I think when we come with this experiential learning and people have done this before, it's really great to be like, hey, here's the points in the project that we know have potential things that we're going to have to deal with. Let's just go ahead and plan for that so that at the end of the day, we're all successful. I think it is very satisfying.
It is like, I love the whole post-mortem process, learning from what we've done. What's frustrating is when like we're all together in this organization and people like, we just went through the post-mortem on that last project and some of the similar issues are rearing their heads and people are like, were we not in that same meeting? Did we not experience this? Why are you ignoring these same signs that we saw that we learned from? Yeah, it's I was always one of those people like growing up where I was able to see mistakes that other people did and be able to go like, I'm not going to go do that thing. I think I had a couple siblings that would make every mistake. And I'm like, I'm thankful for them now for having, not that I didn't make mistakes, once or twice in my life, I've made a mistake. That was it. I capped it. Again, because I planned around it, Sharon.
Obviously.
But it's the same thing with the risk mitigation, is that you looking at your experience, you are collaborating with others, getting their feedback. They have that depth of experience. And so you're saying, and that should be actually a question. If I'm talking with an engineer, says, okay, I think this is about 5 work days of this. You've got me like 25% of the time. All right, 4 weeks, to do this. It's 5 days a week, a work week, 25%. So 4 weeks, you'll have that done. The estimate around that is to ask the question then, what kinds of problems have you seen? What potential things could arise? Sometimes just asking that kind of question helps surface those potential risks. And then you can ask the next question. It's like, if that were to happen, what would we need to do? What would be the impact?
Right. And if you've experienced this, what are some ways that you can preventatively avoid it or deal with it? Like, what's the fastest way to come back from it? I mean, this is, a lot of, when we think about DR strategy and, doing table reads and things like that, it's the idea of, if we already know what to do, we are going to respond in a better manner. This is why people do, all kinds of disaster, type of planning and practicing it.
Yeah. I've always thought that, a big part of, and we talked about this in the last episode about the role of the PM is to gather data and drive accountability. And so like you don't own these activities. You own the structure of that. You're guiding people down, the path. The stakeholders, the project, owners own the ultimate responsibility, but individuals own the task accountability. One of the reasons I love this, again, this is one of my favorite part of the roles, is driving that accountability, but giving more information to those, the directors, the leaders, the VP, the executives that own that project, so that they can make better decisions. So sometimes it's like, look, we've identified these. Here are the potential paths around this. What do you want to do? Here's what I recommend. You need to make a decision.
Yeah. And then they learn to trust you because, it's that idea of, in the physical world, if I'm leading somebody down a path and I'm like, oh, watch out for that. Oh, watch out for that. Far a little ways after that, they're going to be like, I'm watching you and listening to you because I don't want to trip and fall. It's no different whenever you're helping to guide somebody like this and you're helping them to understand what things to avoid and how to deal with things. You're going to build that trust. You're going to build that relationship. You're going to build that ability to communicate with them.
Yeah. Hey, you want to work towards that high trust organization with everybody at every level of the project, from the stakeholders, the leaders, all the way down to the people completing the tasks, because you're more effective, you're more transparent, you're sharing, collaborating with that. And so projects ultimately, even though things will go wrong right and left, but ultimately you'll deliver on that, those business goals because everybody was working together around that, learning together.
Yeah. And I mean, so back to project failure files, what to not do, like, don't plan, don't strategize, and don't worry about what could go wrong because everything's going to be absolutely perfect. And then just watch all your cats go all over the place.
You forgot to say, it's like, and then hope that nothing bad happens.
Is that toxic positivity?
Yeah, no one talks about toxic positive. Wait, Sharon, there's a sticker.
Fine.
That is a sticker. Hang on.
It's totally a thing. It is totally a thing.
Oh, that is a great. I'm going to build that sticker. I'm going to create that sticker tonight. That's great. Wow. But yeah, I mean, if you think about like building resilience into your systems, into your hardware, into your software, and your systems, you want to do that with your methodology as well. And part of that is that you have embedded within to your methodology that risk management, as part of that methodology. So it helps you to adapt more quickly, and it reduces the likelihood of delays because you've anticipated and you have a plan, and you've set expectations around those anticipated path B, path C, whatever those things are.
And they trust you. So your stakeholders know that if something goes wrong, not only have you kind of planned for all of this, but they're ready to go through some of those challenges with you in a way that I don't think they would if you weren't ready to deal with those.
Yeah. Well, and talking about like, so how do you identify these risks? And again, this is because it comes from first, just the more mature you are in that role and the experience you have with that team, with your, whatever the scope of that effort is, the people that you work with, and more higher trust there, then you're going to have those conversations. You're going to say, hey, remember we did something similar to this 6 months ago. We ran into these problems and it took this long through procurement, which tied us up over here, or legal has to sign up. Oh yeah, we don't have that step to go and have legal review. Like all of those kinds of things, those discussions come out of having transparency, being collaborative with the people around you. So that brainstorming activity is so critical for identifying risks and being proactive. Then there's other things like, hey, I have an MBA. Yes, I've done SWOT analyses on projects, and which is again is another way to go and look at and just be very prescriptive in how you look at your project, break it down, and say what are the potential risks that could happen with each step. What would we do? What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats? And then develop a strategy out of each one of those.
Yeah. What not to do, just do things and figure it out.
Hope. Yeah.
Hope and pray. Yeah.
Ignore the past.
Ignore the past. 100%.
Historical clues, the data that's out there. Also being just looking at things through the lens of a checklist or template, and just saying, hey, well, again, this goes back, we would always say with governance is not a checklist. Like I've completed everything on the list, therefore we are well governed. No.
I totally did this the other day. So I did something, I'm not going to tell you what, because I'm too embarrassed. So I did something that I've done a million times. I was like, I got this. I know what's going on. And I'm like, I'm not going to make a checklist because I've done it so many times. Like, there's no way I'm going to mess this up. Like, I know everything about this. I know it's going to surprise you. I messed it up. I totally dropped the ball and missed like 2 or 3 different things. And I got up the next morning and I'm just like, I need to use a checklist, because even for something that you've done a million times, you know everything that can go wrong. You've got all the experience. It's still good to have things in place to hold you accountable and make sure you do what you're supposed to. So from me to you, I think, you just remember, always make sure you put those things in place.
I was thinking about this, had a conversation this weekend, to put it in like a religious perspective. And there's always like the questions like, why are you going to church every week around this? Like, cause like they're telling you the same stuff. Like, yeah. Are you getting it yet? Are you perfect yet? Like, no. And so it's always good. That's why we have a methodology, because you think you have it memorized, you are going to leave things out. And so having a structured approach, having that methodology ensures that you're asking the questions, and half the questions may be NA, it's not applicable. We can move past this. And then, oh yes, we need to figure that piece out.
Well, and every single time, even if you do the same thing over and over, something changes. And this is the thing, like, in software before, like, change was slow, and we were just talking about the fact that now change is so fast in the cloud. Like, everything's just changing. But even in processes, you do things all the time that you don't even realize there's these little changes, and sometimes those little changes can throw you off if you're not prepared, planned, have a checklist. Like, those little changes can be enough to throw you off your game, to where if you had a checklist, you would do the thing you're supposed to do. But those little changes will throw you off enough that maybe you'll miss a step or two. So, always know that things are going to change. Nothing's ever going to go how you expect it to go.
What's your experience, Sharon, using like formal techniques for qualitative and quantitative risk analysis? I mean, that's part of, some of your training.
Six Sigma is all around quantitative and qualitative analysis. And so I think what ends up happening is day to day, we don't do probably as much quantitative analysis as we really, really should. We just have a checklist and okay, we did it, right? Did it or didn't do it. But I think, when it gets into these very large projects where you're trying to start actually seeing the real ROI, the quantitative ROI, people start to really value that analysis. And I think what I would say is, don't assume, what not to do. Don't assume that you have to be a big project or a big company to get value from doing quantitative analysis. Because sometimes even smaller things, you can look at them and very quickly kind of do some analysis that are going to help you. Analyses.
Yeah. I just was thinking back to business school. Wow. That was 25 years ago.
All right, anyway, come on. I'm going to quiz you on some statistics formulas now.
No, please don't. That's where I struggled. My two, I did all right. I was all A's except 2 classes. I got B's. Was my managerial finance and accounting. Stats I actually enjoyed more, but one of my teachers one of the faculty members worked in a chip manufacturing plant, and so had a lot of so we think of like quantitative analysis and so learning about silicon chips and the process and how they look at that and acceptable error rates for all those things that they're constantly looking at with the raw materials coming in, the percentage of filled chips out of the batch, and kind of all those kinds of things. So there's some fascinating stuff in that world that of course does not apply to a lot of what we do in IT, but you can still go and look at various impact analysis, looking at the data on project timelines and costs. And again, this is something where you're constantly baselining, you're looking at similar projects, and you've got to have some flexibility there. They're not always going to be exactly equal. But if you're measuring those things over time, it's not any I always say this about data analysis. It's not any slice of data, any single point of time. It's looking at the trends over time and what are we seeing there. And so there's got to be some consistency. There has to be consistency in the measurements there. But anyway, it is healthy to go and look at that and say, well, look at something like onboarding new employees. You can have data points around what are we seeing? What are the scores on some of the tests, around some of the tools? What are we seeing around like our adoption numbers? Are we seeing them trend up or down? Do we need to tweak some of the onboarding process, provide more training, more hands-on, more in-person versus sitting in front of the screens? Like whatever those things are, those are all things that you can measure based on all those activities to figure out ways to improve that. So it depends on how to measure things, but you should try to measure those, what you can measure.
Well, and I think, in technology, I think often it's very easy to say things like, well, nobody's laying on the table dying, or we're not worried about if a bridge is going to collapse. When you work in industries that put people's lives on the line, all of a sudden the numbers matter a lot. The risk matters a lot.
Yep.
Whereas, and I'm going to say this out loud, if I'm building a SharePoint list, the risk level is different where, depending on what you're using that data for, depending on what you're doing with it. And I think it's easy in technology when we talk about, what not to do. I think it's easy in technology to minimize the level of risk that we are experiencing in these projects. And sometimes I think we say, well, it doesn't matter that much. We don't need to invest that much time in understanding what the risk is because it's really not that big of a deal anyways, if we're not doing something that has kind of high value risk. And I would almost say that it's just as important because when we think about everything from the people who are investing their times to work on it, the outcome of it, what this particular project is going to implement, we need to value that time just as much as, anything else that has a high risk to it.
Yeah. Well, thinking about mitigating and managing risks, let's look at it from the opposite. So, you do want to avoid risks. So if you don't avoid risks, if you are not doing anything around it, you're not taking the time to identify the risks, you're just letting things happen, you're living in the flow, then you are going to constantly find that your project plans are broken, like no one will believe you, low trust, for those plans. If you are not taking the time to go in and when you've identified a plan or somebody does it because you're not doing it, to mitigate that risk and build that into the plan, then the probability is that you're going to hit all of them. You're going to have all of the problems. It's not that it's a risk, it's an eventuality.
Yep.
So, and there are some things that you don't try just to transfer off the risk to third parties, like to drive accountability for those things. But it could be, sometimes it makes sense to transfer that risk. It could be that, that you bring in, you pay a consultant to do something that has expertise in where they're there in place in case those things go wrong. They are the backup plan for those things. So with your tight schedule and limited resources on that project, that you're able to then go focus on what you can control and let the specialists deal with the problem areas.
Yeah, this is why consultants exist. This is why CXOs exist, right? We do fractional CXO positions. This is, people who come in and they're available. This is why retainers exist, is because that way you can ensure that you have somebody that is there to deal with that thing. And it's an investment, whether it's insurance or whether it's a fractional person or whether it's a consultant, it's an investment in knowing that you don't have to worry about that risk as a PM. You've got somebody there to handle that risk for you just in case.
How have you handled building in let's say up front with the project plan? You've built out the project plan, you've identified potential risks. Do you add those into the plan, into the schedule so that they're there. And if they don't happen, it just means it condenses it, that you're delivering sooner. Like I've had pushback from clients, from, managers that are like, why is this in here? Like, why do you have that built in? We don't know if that's going to happen. I'm like, yeah, if it doesn't, good for us, but it's there. So I'm not padding the plan for unknown things. I'm building the plan of what could happen around this. Maybe this is a 25% potential that this could happen. And then over the course of the initial steps, it increases to 50%, whatever that is, but it's already built into the plan for those things. But I mean, it's very different from scope creep of adding new features in. And I would rather have that built into a plan up front, if I have those identified up front, than having to disrupt everybody with a changing timeline and priorities because of adding those things later. I know, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, and I think if it's something known, especially if there's a high chance that there's a known thing that we're going to have to deal with. I look at this is no different than if we know that we are going to be doing a project over a holiday weekend. There's known risk there, right? We know that maybe people won't be as available, or we know that they maybe will be more available, right? Whatever it is. But I think whenever there's something that's consistently known from previous experience primarily, we will always add that in. So, and I am constantly justifying this to people. So I'll get on the call and they'll be like, why did the estimate come back at this, this, and this? And I'll be like, well, in addition to this, this, and this, these are the things that are going to have to happen. We know from historical, information that, from experience, this particular team is slow at responding, or it takes 2 or 3 times through, having a meeting with them to get to this decision point, or maybe this certain place requires, certain documentation to be able to get to a certain point. I think if it's a known risk, and we know that there's contingency planning that has to be put in, we absolutely do that. And to your point, if we get done early and things go down the happy path, that's just more time that we've got for training or for support, or, for something else.
Or when other things go wrong that were unforeseen, you've got the time already built into that. But yeah, I know it happens. I've heard about this. Yeah. No, it's funny. I remember like sitting in this beautiful executive conference room at the phone company headquarters in Pacific Bell in San Ramon, California, sitting around with a bunch of our internal clients, different teams, all more senior than me, but sitting there, and the whole discussion was all around potential delays and risk and mitigation strategies for those things. We weren't talking about the project. We were talking about everything that could go wrong and what we would do. And so we had it down to like, if this happens, here's the order of so I was at the time, I came from the data warehousing world of writing down in the binders that were sitting next to servers of, here's the order of operations to go in and do this first, turn it off and on, then do this, enter this, run this in. If all goes wrong, if nothing happens, the green light doesn't light up, call this person. We had that kind of breakdown, that strategy for each of those potential risks. So we had that built in. We knew who to notify, what the proper notification out to the team. So first to these stakeholders, then to the team, then follow up on this. And it just seemed like overkill until we were using it,
Yeah, no, I think it's the same thing as, all the areas in your life. I like to use a lot of stories to do analogies, because sometimes it helps people to understand, but everything in our lives, we think about what are the other things that are not part of that happy path, right? So we think about like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to exercise every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. No, there's going to be days you're sick, and there's going to be days you don't want to. Do you eat exactly the right number of calories? Do you eat your vegetables? Do you take your vitamins every single day? No. Everybody has these things. You go to a holiday party and you fill up on whatever the best cake of the day is, right? There's always these areas that don't go according to plan, because that's life. And when we start talking about quantitative analysis, you start getting into statistical analysis. Normalized data is not perfect. And if it is perfect, there's something wrong. And we know that because everything has variance, right? So we get to a statistical conversation, everything has variance. And I think the more that you accept the variance as the normal, instead of accepting the perfect as the normal, the more all of your projects start feeling safer and better and more relaxed, and you're not as stressed because you're not trying to force the project to be perfect. You're recognizing that normal variance is part of normal life, and that's part of the project.
Right. And again, if you make that language as part of your methodology and you develop trust, it just becomes part of the conversation that you have with all the stakeholders in there. You're going to then reduce uncertainty. You're going to ensure that your projects stay on schedule within budget. You're going to find that when there are changes and need to be adjustments to that, people are more flexible. They're more willing. They understand. This goes back to one of my Buckleyisms. I know you love hearing these, Sharon, but it's like when you involve people in the process, they are more accepting of and willing to follow the process. So it's when you're having these conversations up front and say, hey, we're now experiencing this thing, we're going into plan B, people will be, all right, hey, I know what to go and do. They'll be more calm. We prepared for this. We know what to go and do. And it also means that if you're more proactive at identifying risks, it means that you're also going to, people that are looking for that work-life balance, they're going to have a better understanding of what they could be asked to do. If you know on Thursday or Friday at the office, hey, we just went up to 80% risk level that this could happen, just know that we're on call. If this happens, we might have to work Saturday afternoon. Just be prepared. I hope it doesn't happen, but that's much better than, hey, see you later. And then the calls, hey, you got to come in. Sorry. No. Again, and there's other ways of mitigating, again, the balance on that side of it. If you do work them on the weekend and when there's an opening to give that time back somewhere else.
I mean, are you even a project manager if you haven't been called at like 2:00 in the morning because everything's falling apart and it's your job to sit on a call and be able to do nothing about it?
I've had those times where I didn't even have to have somebody call me, where I just had like the premonition, like call in. I'm just gonna check my email. Like, oh, something's lit up. There's people that drove into the office. I'm gonna go in. I did that at 2, 3 in the morning on a Sunday morning.
As one does.
Couldn't sleep because of this massive project, and so it happens occasionally. But again, the more that you do that and prepare for that, that becomes, people recognize that as a strength of that organization. It becomes one where they gravitate towards those teams, to those organizations that have that kind of culture. You get the stronger stakeholder trust. You've got your better success rates with your projects, and that you have more effective and resilient teams that know, hey, I can bring these things up. I can ask questions around this, and it's part of our process that we will then plan for that. Every scenario, what could happen, let's figure it out, how that would impact the plan. And then let's know what we do if that happens.
Yeah, I think it makes people feel more real, and more seen and more supported. Across the board, the people who work on the project, the stakeholders in your project, anybody you're communicating to, it makes communication more natural too. When you're not just like barreling through and, let's put our heads down and not pay attention to the real world around us. It definitely gives you more confidence, I think, across the entire team.
Agreed. Well, let's talk about here practical guidance for how people can integrate better risk management in.
Ignore it. Completely 100% ignore. Oh, no, that's not the right answer, is it?
Yeah, the opposite day. Yeah. It goes without saying, like, the sooner you can identify the potential risks, the earlier the better that you can work out a plan. Again, you'll get more and more data in. You'll know the likelihood of that actually happening. You see this in support organizations where they say, hey, what's the potential of this? They'll they'll flag items. They'll have a severity level of those. So there's a couple different indicators that you look at for those things. But for a lot of support organizations, they do this. It's built into their process. So they know a new ticket comes in to go and do this. Here's a severity issue of this. Could be a potential things depending on what it is. And then they try to document that so that if it's the first thing that's causing this problem, here's the process to go and solve it. It's the second thing or a combination, here's the process to go and follow that. So as much as possible, make those things repeatable. It's the same with this. You get better at identifying, asking the questions, and certain tasks, certain vendors, certain teams, certain whatever all those different things is. This comes with maturity is you get better at identifying. I see dead people. Yeah, I see. We're both thinking that. But you can start to see, a better example is you start to see the matrix. You can start to see before things happen.
It's like premonitions.
Right.
You can start seeing things come in your path. No, I mean, you really do. I mean, because you become very risk aware. And so you kind of know how to lean right and lean left. And you're kind of prepared for the things that are coming at you. But I think, and I always say, educated users are better users, educated stakeholders are better stakeholders. But I think part of this is just making sure that everybody kind of knows what's going on. We're all playing by the same rules. We've said this over and over, right? Know what you're up against, write it down, communicate it with the team, make sure that everybody knows, what you're dealing with so that when things happen, you're working as a team to deal with those things. It doesn't make everything fall apart when something happens.
Yeah. One other thing that I really like too is, so I had an executive, a VP who loved this is to outline. So having a risk register. So an outline of here's all the different things. So I like the 4-blocker template, and that is more of a in context to where we are with the upcoming tasks as part of that. But that might point to another presentation, another document that has, hey, here's what we've identified, all these various things, and here's the various plans to mitigate each of those risks. But if you have that and can assess the steps there, look at the impact, the cost, the people, the time impacts of each of those things, and have that as a regular discussion point, and even have maybe you have a percentage of a percentage chance this may happen or something or other, figure out, something that works on that register and have that as a discussion point for the leadership. Again, they're going to have more confidence in if this happens. And you might, we used to do the color indicators. It's not just the arrows up, medium, or down, but green, yellow, red, so that they had a quick way to scan and see, and even another column that had the previous week so they could see if it changed. To see if it's moving, up or down. It improved. It was yellow, now it's green, or it was green, now it's red. Why? What happened? And you can have that, conversation.
Sorry, I'm just thinking, I'm sitting here thinking about this. We've been doing this for so long. We're so I know everything you're talking about, and I totally understand this. And I'm just thinking back, when I first started, and whenever I start something new, what that feeling is when I don't have this in place, and it's very chaotic and it's stressful, and you're just kind of doing things and trying to figure it out clumsily along your way. And I think, for anybody who's watching this, who's well, I mean, when would you even use this? And when, how do I know if I'm doing this right or not? I think if you're making the same mistakes over and over and over, or you feel stressed about things and you're not sure what's going to happen, or you're not sure how to deal with things that, potentially are coming at you that are disastrous, I think those are all key indicators that you're not managing your risk well enough. And you need to start thinking about what are all those things that could go wrong next time so that I don't have to have that stress again. Maybe you get to sleep at night through a project for the first time, Yeah.
Well, and there's no right, to your point, there's no right or wrong way to go and do this. It could be, if you've never done this before, just go you've got your project plan, and with the major milestones, maybe you just create a document as an aside, where you say for each of them have list the milestone and say, based on what is happening in the milestone, what do you think are the potential risks of you not staying on budget, on time, within the resource constraints that you have. What are the things that could happen? And just jot down like one line, one sentence for each of those things. Then you can add more detail. Well, like for example, so let's say your project is to develop the new company intranet. And so the first milestone would be to go through and do a content review and assessment of everything that's out there. And one of the risks of that is that you don't have the proper access or people that like provide that. What would you go and do? And so again, you can start to add more detail, which then modify the tasks, the checkpoints, the things that you need to do within the work breakdown structure there. But it could be something as simple as that. Then go to the next milestone. Okay, the next phase, we've got that. Now we're going to do our information architecture. What does this look like? And then what are the risks of that? Again, not getting proper input from all of the stakeholders. Well, what you can do to mitigate that is have a series of look at who is participating in those discussions. Sometimes you do it as a group. Sometimes you got to chase people, do one-on-one, get them to actually do physical signatures. This is one of my favorite things, that saying, no, I agree with everything. This looks like it's exactly what we want, like to sign off on that.
My wax seal.
Yeah, that's right. The Game of Thrones-esque, yes. No, but but it could just be something as simple as that. But just going through that exercise will help you make your project plan more resilient and get you thinking about, as you add more and more to the project plan, what are the potential risks? Unless this happens, or kind of all those other things. Start documenting those.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a maturity thing, right? The more you do that, the more you're aware of what's happening, the more confident you feel about things. Yeah. And as a project manager, like this is the moment in your career where you get to go home and go to bed and go to sleep, and you're not like having stress dreams all night. You're like, you know what? Everything that we know what could go wrong. We've already got plans for everything. And for the most part, everything I can do, I've done. And so I can sleep good tonight.
Yep. So what would you say? What's the call to action? What do you want to leave people with here?
I mean, I definitely think that, if you're not already doing this, if you're not identifying your risk, you're not including that in your strategy or not planning for it, definitely do what Christian just said, right? Go through that exercise and write down all of your stuff and identify what could go wrong and what risks you have and how you would handle those risks. And then that way you'll have that list, and each project, hopefully you'll mature a little bit more. But I think if you're not doing it, please make sure that you learn how to do it and start doing it. I think it's going to bring a level of sanity and calmness to any project manager's life.
The only thing I would add on to that is that you go into that initial documentation and then brainstorm with the rest of the team and the other stakeholders. So get their input on that as well, because they're going to see things that you don't see. And they may add to what you've already added. So additional detail around that. So it needs to be a collaborative effort. But again, the more that you can make that part of the culture of how you run projects, then you are going to develop this skill as an organization. And it's going to become a strength. Your planning skills will become a serious strength. And it's a competitive advantage to be good at your planning and risk management.
Yeah, you'll be one of the things that a lot of people mention to me is, it brings a peace. It brings a sense of calm, because when you have chaos, a lot of times people aren't planning for that. But if you plan for chaos, then you can be calm in the middle of chaos because you expected it to happen and you know how to deal with it.
Yeah, you're not avoiding the uncertainty, the risk. What you're doing is you're preparing for it, and you're turning those risks into opportunities for growth and project resilience, and you're developing those skills. Again, I think when we look at this, project management and change management in general, organizations that are good at that, this is a core component of being good at change management, is being able to identify and mitigate risks. And then it just becomes part of the process, and it's not a scary thing.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it for this week's episode. I wasn't running the banners. I just completely forgot throughout. But
Wait, I'm
we
gonna
do have
use my
banners here.
magic. See if I
That's
get some
right.
banners up.
But you can follow us out there. We're on lots of other socials, not just X. You can find us all over the place on LinkedIn. In fact, we'd love to have more connections over on LinkedIn. Of course, we'd also love you to go and follow out on YouTube. Sharon's got a page. I got a link out of mine to Sharon at the bottom of the page as well. So, but please follow. You can find all of the episodes and as well as the community out on Facebook. If you're into the Book of Faces, we have a thing there. You can join us there and say hello and share the favorite episodes or the things that we got completely wrong. It's not happened yet. Sharon and I never make mistakes.
We have zero risk.
No, well, we don't make mistakes because we plan for it. So we plan to not to make mistakes. It's just built in. Except for the times that we do, but we don't count those.
We've just become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
We embrace our imperfections. That's right. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next Monday and every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and join us for the next episode. We'd love to see you there.
Bye.
Rock and roll.